All right, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to another continuing education presentation jointly hosted by the Actuaries Club of Boston and the Actuaries Club of Hartford and Springfield. My name is Joe Finch, and I'm the president of ACHS. This is the second presentation in a series lasting through the first 3 weeks of November. We kick things off on Monday with a look at how the COVID pandemic is affecting the industry. Yesterday we were off, which hopefully meant everyone had an uneventful and relaxing day, although I'm not sure that is actually the case for many of us. In a moment, I will introduce today's presenter, Erin Hatzikostas, and her session, Empowering Authenticity to Transform Your Company. But before I do that, there are a couple of things I want to go over that will help you get the most out of today's session and our other sessions over the next few weeks. So first, as with all ACB and ACHS meetings, this session will be conducted in accordance with our antitrust guidelines, which can be found on each club's website. Also, this session is being recorded and will be posted on our websites later in the week. Next, we typically, as I mentioned earlier, but for folks that are still joining, we typically ask folks to turn off their cameras, but today, in the spirit of promoting authenticity, you're more than welcome to turn your cameras on. If any of you have watched sports during the pandemic, I'm sure you've seen those like pre-commercial break sort of Zoom shots of fans in their living rooms after a big play. I know it's kind of cheesy, but that's sort of what we're going for today. On another note, please hold any questions till the end of the presentation. Since we're expecting a couple of hundred of attendees, if you do have a question, we ask that you use the raise hand functionality in Zoom. You can do that by clicking the participants icon in your Zoom toolbar if you're using the app. And then towards the bottom, there's a number of sort of reactions that you can select. One's probably yes, no, go slower, go faster. Under more, there's like a thumbs up, thumbs down. So feel free to use those if you have a question, and it'll sort of pop you up to the top of our participants list, and we'll be able to know that you have a question, and at that point, you can simply unmute yourself and ask your question. Lastly, if you're using the Zoom app on a desktop, laptop, or tablet, there is a view setting in the upper right-hand corner. I think it's like 9 dots, and it says view. This allows you to control which cameras you see. For most presentations, you may want to set this to speaker view, which automatically shows you only the person that is speaking and the content that is being shared. That particular setting isn't necessary for today's session, as I mentioned, since we're asking folks to turn on their cameras if they want to. But from some of our more traditional presentations, that will probably be the ideal setting. Now that all of that housekeeping is out of the way, I would like to introduce today's presenter, Erin Hatzikostas. Erin is a former corporate CEO turned founder of Be Authentic Incorporated. She's a sought-after career coach, TEDx speaker, nationally published thought leader, and podcast co-host of Because. Sorry, I know Erin's taking control over, so it's throwing off. No, it's fine. I just wanted to make sure I got your introduction right. And she's the co-host of a podcast, Because, with Erin and Nicole. She's also releasing her first book, You Do You-ish, later this year. Prior to launching Be Authentic Inc., she spent 22 years working at Aetna and was the CEO of Payflex, an Aetna subsidiary, from 2016 to 2018. In her 3 years leading the company, she was able to triple their earnings and send employee engagement skyrocketing. You may ask how she did that, and that was through authenticity, of course. She's married to her husband, Manny, who she met while stumbling through and failing an early career in the actuarial field. They have 2 children, Ella and Mick, and in Erin's free time, you can find her coaching basketball, running, skiing, or probably dancing wherever you're not supposed to dance. So with that, I'll hand things over to Erin.
Thank you so much, Joe. Hey, everyone, I'm so excited to be here. Originally, we were supposed to be all together in person, of course, but that's changed. Although I have to admit, it is a precarious position I'm in. With a couple of days ago, the impact of COVID on life insurance and healthcare. Yesterday, the election. Today, the election. And tomorrow, the impact of the low rate environment. It does feel a little bit like I was asked to do the halftime show at a funeral, but I promise to make it worth your while. We all need a little spark, a little inspiration, and we need to walk away for an hour, hopefully in the politics. And I know you actuaries, so please put down your homemade spreadsheets, your calculations, and let's spend a little time together. But actually, last night I watched the election. Tonight, I'm so much more excited because one of my favorite shows is on, The Amazing Race. You guys seen it, probably heard of it. And I love that show so much because you get to watch them go around and explore the world. But I also can't help but think, can you imagine like how much these people prepare, right? They prepare their casting videos and then they get on and physically they have to get ready and probably studying the old episodes and the strategies and maybe even learning new languages. And then they get on this show and it's kind of one obstacle after another. And in fact, a couple weeks ago, if you watch it, there was this couple, they were Olympians, 2 women Olympians. And they literally got beat out by 9 other teams because they forgot to hook a hose to the front or a horn to the front of their car. And I can't help but think, does that feel a little bit like your career, right? And maybe your career is not like The Amazing Race. Maybe it's a little bit more like this. Does it feel like this a little bit? Video cracks me up every time. And I just have to say, first of all, can we also look at his friend who is just sitting there like casually watching this, not helping him, not laughing? But the reality is, this is what a lot of us feel like, right? And you go through and you work so hard, but then you run into these obstacles. And I'm here to tell you that this is going to be the start of something totally different. And my goal is to make your career feel a lot more like this. So today, what we're going to do is I'm actually going to put a name to that treadmill that you're feeling. And I'm actually going to provide a solution that's like so stupid simple that it might not seem like even plausible, but bear with me. I promise you that the things I teach today can change everything. Now, I want to recognize again, it's a crazy time right now. And the fact that you showed up, like you came here for an hour, and hopefully you're not multitasking because you just missed some really freaking funny gifts. So come back to me. But what I want to tell you is I recognize how hard that is. I spent lots of time in the corporate world going from meeting to meeting. And quite frankly, running my own business is not a cakewalk either. But what I truly believe is that in life, you're handed these certain moments where you get this sort of puff of inspiration. And the way I think about it, especially this time of year, is if you look at a tree and you look at the leaves that are falling, right? They come down. And all it takes is one small to completely change the trajectory of that leaf. And that's what I hope to do for you today. Now, I'm going to talk for 45, 50 minutes, but I hope that there's just at least one puff of inspiration, one that you might not even recognize the impact today, but in the future changes the trajectory of your career and your life for better. Now, I want to tell you about one of the major puffs of inspiration in my life and in my career. So I'm from Michigan. And no, I did not go to the University of Michigan. Instead, I was going to become a paper engineer. Why? Because like many of you, I was good at math. And I remember at the time I thought, well, I really care about the environment. So I'm going to go do paper engineering. So I went to Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan, who had a paper engineering program. In my freshman year, I realized something important. I was really good at math. I was really bad at physics. That concept of having to put your practical brain in killed me. And so I continued on. Again, you might relate to this story where, you just keep taking classes and keep trying to figure out where you want to go next. So I continued to take math courses. And one day my roommate came home from her class. So my roommate, her name was Amy, and she was 2 years older than me. So very impressionable. She was already in the business school. And she came home so excited that day. I'll never forget it. She said, Erin, I have found the career for you. High pay, low stress. You just have to be good at math. And you're like the only person I know that's good at math. It's called an actuary. Now, at that time, I had never even heard of what an actuary was. And so I'm a little bit older. What I did is I went to the library and got out a booklet, right? And tried to figure out what this actuary thing was. And I remember looking at the booklet thinking, oh, there's a lot of them sitting in Connecticut. I'll go to Connecticut. And so that summer, I swindled Aetna sort of into hiring me into their actuarial program because I had no exams passed yet. And I remember coming out, I was so impressionable. I'm from a very small town, and Hartford, quite frankly, I remember the driver taking me between the Middletown and the Hartford office. This is when Aetna had the two offices, and I had interviews in both. And I was enamored by the fact that he knew to go from one highway to another highway. So all this to say, I had a lot to learn. And so I came out and I started taking exams and I took about 6 exams, and I became the proud owner of 6 failures in the field. And I'll never forget, a lot of you that are a little bit older will remember this. So when I was taking exams, like there was nothing online, right? And you had to call that lady, right? That not so nice woman. And she had no social graces, no bedside manner. And I remember it was exam number 1. Things have all changed. I don't know what it was, but it was like the base exam. And I would bet my life savings I had passed that, which was like $250. And I remember getting on the phone, waiting for an answer, and she just says, fail. And the reality is, although I truly, as Joe said, was by all stretches of the imagination, a complete failure in the actuarial field, I was lucky enough to realize that I had other qualities to bring. And so I tested and took on new roles. And eventually I became the CEO of a pretty legit company, one of Aetna's subsidiary companies, Payflex. And as he mentioned, like not just became the CEO, but had incredible results. But the reason I tell you this story isn't necessarily to tell you that lesson about failure. The reason I tell you this story is that if Amy hadn't come home with such passion for me and care for me finding my career, and if she wouldn't have told me that she had found the career for me, I never would have made my way out to Connecticut. And if I never would have made my way out to Connecticut, I never would have met my husband at Aetna. And if I never would have met my husband, of course, I never would have Ella and Nick. So you never know those moments where you're going to have that puff of inspiration that sets your leap in a whole new direction. And again, I hope to do that for you today. Now, back to the Amazing Race. So again, does this relate? Is this how your career feels? You know, I know you. You got all the best grades in high school, and you went to the best schools, and you went to the best colleges, and you didn't just soar at college. You took these other exams, which I've proven are pretty hard to pass. And then you came out in your career and you did the same thing. You worked hard, you showed up, you did the models, you figured things out, you went to late meetings and worked over the weekend. But the reality is, you also probably want more. Now, I know that's not for all of you, but you know who you are. Your exams don't define you. You want true success. That might mean you want to be seen. You want to be satisfied. You want to be significant. You might even want a seat at the table. Or you might want to stand out. And I know there's a lot of you that are probably saying, nope, not that one. And you all, I'm sure, want to do this without sacrificing who you are. So I want to first stop and I want to get your feedback. I want to hear how you're feeling. This is where my buddy Joe's going to help me out. How do you feel about your career? A, B, C. A, do you feel pretty amazing? B, You kind of like, yeah, I want more. Or C, are you our favorite? Are you steady Eddie and you're content where you're at? So I'd love to hear from you. How are you feeling?
So we can give folks a couple of seconds to respond. I'm seeing results come in, but as soon as, give everybody another, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds or so, and then
Okay,
we can share the
we're gonna
results.
have some nice awkward silence, which is part of authenticity. Fun. Okay, I see the line starting to stop. So there's about 40 plus people here that I'm really, really talking to you. And the others that say I'm content, guess what? I'm also talking to you. Because what I've found in my career is that so many people, especially people like you and me who have been high achievers and have kicked butt, and then we get into the working world and we hit a certain wall. And we've been programmed to think that it's okay to be good enough. I was too, and I'll tell you that story. But I'm here to tell you that you can have a big career without the compromise, without the BS, without having to sacrifice who you are. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how authenticity can be the key to doing that. And for those of you, which I know is a lot of you, you're like, okay, like we already hit the kumbaya part. I'm also going to convince you to totally think about the concept of authenticity in a way you never thought about it. So don't dismiss this yet. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the treadmill. Slide one advance. Let's see. I think I have to control that, Joe. Slide one advance. Oh, it's working. So let's talk about this treadmill, right? Like that was a funny gift, right? And actually, for me, it hit home a little bit because if anybody's worked at Aetna in the Middletown office, we used to have this track in the gym and they had treadmills around it. That happened to me. No lie. Now I was a little more graceful. I just went flying out the back. But the reality is, I know that for many of you, this metaphor is pretty spot on. Does it ever feel like you're running and somebody just keeps coming by, you're not always sure who, and keeps hitting that up button and that up button and that up button? And you start to wonder, how much more can I take? And you also, it's not clear what your path is, right? Especially for those of you in the actuarial field, like your path has been completely laid out for you, right? Maybe you get to jump and you get to go in different avenues, obviously, in the actuarial field, but it's pretty cut and dry. Unfortunately, that's not the case in your career. And what happens to so many of us is we hit this wall, and this wall is one that keeps coming up, and sometimes we climb over, and sometimes we smash our face into it, but it's there, and it has a name. And I actually already availed it to you because the slides weren't working. That wall is called BS burnout. And it's real. And it impacts us so much that why I'm so passionate is not just that I don't want to see you hit this wall, but I believe that oftentimes the only people that are jumping over that wall are not the people we need at the table, that in the leadership positions. We need more diversity. We need more flair. We need more authenticity. And what happens, you had all those S's, right? That success that you wanted to have. And unfortunately, that wall, what it does is it brings you to a place where you start to feel pressure. And maybe it's the politics. How about the PowerPoint? Now, I hate me a PowerPoint. You as actuaries must hate PowerPoint. And that often leads to being perplexed, maybe even panicked. And for many of us, it leaves us paralyzed. I want to tell you that we can get over that wall. And I want to go back, Joe, if you can bring up another poll. I want to hear from you. Does this resonate with you? How many people, it's a previous slide, but if you can just pull that up. How many people have faced BS burnout? I want to hear from you. Does this resonate, or you're like, no, Never seen it. Don't know what you're talking about. A few unicorns. Now, I have to apologize. This is sort of a little bit of a passive aggressive, a little bit bitchy poll that I put here together. But I just wanted to get a feeling from you because I think it's really important with anything that you face that you name it. And so as we think about this problem of BS burnout, part of the problem is nobody sat you down, whether that was in undergrad, it was in your first years in working world, it was in the actuarial program you were in, and told you that your career isn't going to be just about working harder. But there are these sort of gymnastics that come about. And what also has happened to you, no fault of yours and no fault of others, is that you have been sort of given this crusty old career playbook. We, for decades, continue to preach the same things like executive presence and networking and politics and lean in. And the reality is, it's time. There is no better time, especially with the pandemic that you guys are all sitting in, to be able to think about a new career playbook. You also are probably pretty sick of all the actuary jokes you hear. So I just want to promise you, I'm not going to make any of those today. I know you actuarials are pretty fun. Okay. I know you're not called actuarials. I always love that. So what does this all mean? I am here to give you a spark that says that you can break free, that you can have a big career without compromise. And so what we're going to talk about today, it's going to be pretty indulgent. It's going to be focused on you. But I also want to be clear, because I talked about the subject of this is how authenticity is going to transform your company. And I really want to focus on you. But the reality is, especially as people that care about numbers, this is impacting our companies every day. Joe, if you can just give me control back so I can advance it. This issue, this BS burnout, is manifesting itself in ways that are impacting our bottom line. So one thing I want to point to, if you've ever heard of the Gallup Employee Engagement Poll, this is a poll that they do quite often. In fact, they just did one sort of pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. And it looks at how engaged are people in their job. Now, when I was first doing a talk on this and I was prepping with somebody and a friend said, what is engaged? And I remember going to look it up because that's what you do these days, right? You ask Alexa or you Google it because you don't think for yourself. And I stopped and I said, it basically means people don't give a shit about their job. And if you don't think that's a problem, then you kind of have a problem. And so the numbers today are 31%, abysmal. Less than a third of people are actually actively engaged at work. And it doesn't stop there. If you look at a study by Harvard, they also showed that companies with higher employee engagement were 21% more profitable. Now, I did some quick Erin actuarial failure math, and that's actually equal to about $420 billion we're leaving on the table because our people don't give a shit about the job. That's insane, but not reported. And so while you're working on your models to figure out the number of NICU days to put into some model about healthcare costs, the reality is you're missing out on billions of dollars because we don't have a work environment that busts down the BS burnout. And that's what we're here to do. So my slides are still not working. But I think when we go to the poll, Joe, yeah, we're good now. We're good. Something happens when we go to the poll.
All right. Well, that's the last one. So I think we should be all set.
We're good. We're good. So you hear me standing here, this sort of bold person, you might be thinking, well, sure, of course, you know how to get through this, but what about me? And I'm here to tell you, I have been there too. And for me, it really manifested itself in one particular moment that I'll never forget. I remember I had now joined the PayFlex team within Aetna, and I slowly had been rising up. They've been giving more and more responsibilities to me. And then one Friday afternoon, I got a text from my boss. You know that one. Can we talk? So he calls me up and he says, this is kind of heavy for a Friday, but I've decided to leave the company. And I want to see if it's okay if I recommend you to be our next COO. Paused, replied, no, thank you. So why? Why in hell would I say no to such a prestigious opportunity? Because I was worried too about BS burnout. I worried that if I took this job, I would have to, my ego would grow and my calendar would overflow and my home life might become a shit show. My personality might even start to blow. And I didn't want that. But then I thought about it over the weekend and it hit me. You shouldn't not do something because you hate the way it was done before. You can do things your own way. So I made a commitment to take on that big role and to knock down that wall in a way that nobody had knocked it down before. And I didn't know exactly what that meant. I didn't have a playbook, but I remember literally days after I took that job, procurement came a call. And they're like, we have got to renegotiate this massive contract you have with one of your major vendors. And it was like a make it or break it contract negotiation. The vendor was actually threatening to increase our rates. And we were so fragile at that time that it would have broke us. And I remember going into the meeting with their senior executive on the other side and not really having a strategy. And I just looked at him and I said, what's important to you in this negotiation? And what happened was really magical. He didn't see it coming. And he gave me a response, which was kind of spilling his guts. So I knew it was important to him. And then he, of course, turned that question back on me. And out of my mouth poured, well, our financials are struggling. And if we can negotiate this deal without a price increase, I'll have a good shot at becoming the next CEO. I really want to become the next CEO. So I had thrown myself fully and authentically right at this poor guy. But here's the thing. A couple months later, we completed that negotiation and was a highly successful outcome. Why? Because he's human. And he largely pushed that deal through because he also wanted to see me get the job as well. And it was in that moment that I realized that this concept of being yourself that was still forming in me, this concept of authenticity, it wasn't just this passive thing. I realized that I could actually use authenticity as my new career playbook. I could use it as my secret weapon. And believe me, I started to try and use it everywhere. It was like this ninja in a gunfight. I started using it in high stake negotiations, and I started using it even in things like my LinkedIn profile and introductions and meetings to, giving big prestigious talks like that. And time again, I had success. And look, I'd be lying if I was like, this was the silver bullet, I was all roses. But even as that person that failed as an actuary in her first career, I still can tell you the odds definitely started to tip in my favor. And so after this happened, I started hearing more and more and listening, and people started to call me authentic. And it was when I went to leave the corporate world and not really knowing what I wanted to do, just knowing I had passion for something more, that this word came screaming at me, authenticity. And so I became obsessed. I really started to ask myself, what is it? And I stumbled, trust me, my first keynote that I gave, I defined it as these three different things. And somebody came up to me afterwards and they were like, well, that's not really me. And so I became even more obsessed. What does it mean? And I remember the day that I looked into what's the Greek origin, right? That tells you everything as a semi-Greek, right? And the Greek origin of the word is authentikos. And authentikos actually means to be genuine, means to be original, and it means to be authoritative. It's like this beautiful intersection between being yourself, being badass. I like to say it's kind of like Joe Exotic had a baby with Kamala Harris. Authenticity. But that wasn't enough. That didn't tell me, why did people call me authentic? Why did I call certain people authentic? People like Michelle Obama and Jacinda Ardern, and we would put those labels, right? When we'd see it, we'd feel it, but we couldn't define it, right? Because it's almost an oxymoron. And so I spent the last 6 months really reflecting, researching, reading, and coming up with not just an answer to what it was, but I wanted to put a formula so I could teach it to other people. Because I knew it was much more than a meditation or a kumbaya kind of word. And so I put a formula to it. And this formula, it's not just about being bold, it's not just about being audacious, it's actually something that anybody can practice. And that formula is something I call the 6 principles of strategic authenticity. Conveniently spells out an acronym, humans. You can read in a counterclockwise way. And what I found at the end of the day is that authenticity is about, first of all, humility. And it's not accidental. It's about purposely being humble and knowing that it's a speed pass to connecting with other people. It's also about being unexpected. This is really about doing things that are fresh and new. It builds mystery and curiosity and followership. I'll talk about that. It's about modeling. It's about actually modeling the behavior and the actions that you want for people to feel and to be and to do instead of using words. Said more simply, it's about shutting up and showing up. It's about adapting, which is really critical and sometimes is a little tough for people. An oxymoron, authenticity, adapting. But it's so critical that you're able to plug into other people's authenticity. And it's also about adapting your own authenticity. The person you are today should not be the person you are tomorrow. It's called growth. And one of my favorite, it's about narrating. It's about telling stories. And this one's going to be so hard for you. It's about finding times where you ditch the facts and the data and the bullets, and instead you take people on a journey. You tell them a story, you narrate them through. There's actually research that shows that stories are remembered 22 times more than facts and figures. And couldn't we all use that in a world like this? And it's about sparking others. I truly believe that authenticity is like one of the most contagious things there is, like a good kind of contagious, which we really need. And inspiration, it's a circular reference. What happens is you should always be either seeking out being inspired or inspiring somebody else. Think of it like a game of hot potato. And it doesn't happen in one direction. It is not just something where you get inspired from the leaders above you. It happens in all directions. So what I want to do is take you a little bit deeper into 2 of the concepts, since we only have about 45 minutes here today. And I want to talk about humble and expected and really help you understand what I mean by not just understanding these as words, but putting little tiny actionable strategies to them to start to change the game. Little fire starters. Now, I also want to tell you, as Joe mentioned, I do have a book. It's out for pre-sale, and I wanted to make an offer to you. An actuarial club offer. This book goes through all of my principles, all 6 of the humans framework in much more detail. And I'm also offering a bunch of other freebies that I'd love for you to check out if this is something that speaks to you. So you can see that you can go to my website there, theauthenticinc.com, you do you-ish. And I'd love for you to check it out so that I don't leave you here with just a small part of the equation when you're really creating it all. So let's talk about humility. The way I think about humility is that we have to retrain our brains, and we shouldn't actually distrust our flaws, but rather we can use our flaws to create trust. Humility is like this Disney speed pass to connection. What happens is you create this thing that I call the humility halo. And when you start to purposely use humility, it creates this connection. It also creates intrigue. And ultimately, it creates trust. So, for example, when I told you that story about me failing the actuarial exams, let me be honest, that was purposeful. I looked for ways to make sure that I expose who I am when you least expect it. Because I know that telling you that story versus telling you how great I was as a CEO and what a fabulous career and how many like business buzzwords I can throw in there, they are two genuinely different paths to connection. And humility, it isn't about being an angel, right? Like this isn't about being perfect. It has to be sincere, but it's really more about being self-aware, being vulnerable, and actually being a little bit courageous. And it's not a one and done. So I talk about the cycle of humility. And this is something that I'm constantly doing, right? So for example, I'll tell you, if you could see where I'm at right now, I have a stack of games for my kids. You can see the empty things there to put together what I have as a presentation place, right? I'm constantly looking for how do I give people a window into who I am and the imperfections that I have on purpose. Because I know you are not perfect either. So I really encourage you to think about one activity I want to give you is to actually sit down and write and start to notice what are 3 to 5 things that you could actually use for this humility halo. So for me, I actually have a list. Like, the actuarial story. Now I have been telling that one. I just got interviewed for a board position. I told that, like, I use it everywhere because it's so much different and it's so much easier not only to relate with me, but also what's so powerful about it is then when I need to tell you that I was a freaking badass too and tripled the earnings of the company and sent employee engagement skyrocketing, like I have the permission to do that and you're ready to take it in. So think about, so I've got my actuarial failures, I've got my big forehead, I've got my, hodgepodge of a set. I've had, I'm terrible at directions and noticing details, right? Like what are those things that you can start to expose, whether that's in an introduction that you do like I did, or it could be in a meeting with somebody as you're presenting, or just in your general conversation. It's a great way to really wake people up, connect, and just continually take that through the cycle. Ultimately, what you'll start to realize is that you can turn these super flaws into your superpowers. And again, that's what I do all the time. So I want to leave you with just one little practice item. So 2, actually. The first is make this list. Write them down, start to notice them. And what happens when people are around me and hear about authenticity and follow me, like there's this awareness they start to see. They start to see stories they can tell. They start to see these humility moments. So I hope that you can do that. But very tangibly, I want you to find those moments, and then I want you to actually practice them. So as I mentioned, I want you to incorporate in a presentation or an interview or a business introduction. I want you to use it at a family party if that's the right place to start, or with your children, or with your spouse, or with your friends. How can you use that as a moment to connect with somebody new or somebody existing? in a faster way. Next, I want to talk about unexpected. You heard of Jacinda Ardern. I had never heard of this woman until about 8 months ago. Jacinda is the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And if you followed the coronavirus at all, I'm sure none of you have, but if you followed what's happening in other countries, right? Like it's so, especially at the beginning, it's fascinating, and just wanted to seek out like who was doing it right, who was keeping infections down. I can guarantee you that one of the first places you looked at was New Zealand. Now, New Zealand is an island, right? So they have that going for them, although one might argue it's the United States, along with Canada and Mexico, but they were able to contain the coronavirus like nobody else. And what Jacinda did so well and was even called out as being this authentic leader. And she did things like she got on social media. Is that unexpected for a leader? No, right? Our leader likes to do that all the time. But she took it a step further. She would get on, she would do Facebook Lives, and she'd show up in her sweatshirt, and she'd talk about how she just put her children to bed so she could relate with others who were obviously juggling a lot right now. And that strategy, along with her communication and constant connecting with constituents, I believe is the number one reason why New Zealand, was able to really fight off the COVID spread more than anybody else. And what I want you to remember is that people respect authority, especially some of you are probably in some big jobs. At the end of the day, they follow authenticity. And that's what we need, right? Respect only lasts so long, but followership is where you get the best talent, you get the best results, and you get the best relationships, and you really get the best life. So I want you to think about this concept of unexpected. There's also some science behind unexpected. So there's something called the surprise sequence that's really interesting. And so there's actually a book on this, which I forgot to write down the name for. It's in some other notes, where they actually talk about how powerful the concept of unexpected is. And what happens is that the neurons in your brain, when somebody sort of catches you off guard, it wakes them up and it gets them into this mode that it's like, I need to figure this out. There's a puzzle and I'm not sure the answer, but I do know that if I look away, I might not figure it out. Who couldn't use that right now, right? This crazy world that we were already in pre-COVID, and now we're on Zoom calls and they're probably checking election results and working on financial models. But just by being unexpected, if you go into that meeting where you're like, damn it, I really need my business folks to listen to me because this is important. Stop being normal. Start being unexpected. Guarantee you, they're going to look. I had this great coach. She told me one thing that just stuck with me forever. And she said, Erin, if you want to be a good leader, look around what everybody else is doing and do the opposite. She so had me at opposite. So what's one small thing that you can do? I want you to take a look at your LinkedIn profile. This is something I'm so freaking passionate about. When I say LinkedIn profile, I also mean your resume. First of all, stop playing business buzzword bingo everywhere. I'm telling you, I just recently did a TED Talk, why you don't have to compromise for your career. And as I was prepping for that TED Talk, I thought, I'm going to get one profile from LinkedIn as an example. I picked the first freaking one. And do you know how many buzzwords were in it? Flawless execution and matrix, blah, blah, blah. People are done. They're sick of it. And if some HR person tells you you need that crap to go through the sausage factory to get the next job, I call BS. So go into your LinkedIn profile. And if you want an example, if you look at my LinkedIn profile, for example, all of my position summaries, they're actually these short stories like I would tell a friend at the bar instead of buzzwords. Just try it, experiment. Like, just pick one thing to change, tell a story, or I also firmly believe highlight what is your superpower. Okay, sure, you've done 18,000 actuarial jobs and models and blah, blah, blah. But what's your superpower? Because you have one, right? And that could be something like, I have this unique ability to one moment be knee deep in models and in the weeds, and then the other translating that to the business world. What is that? What is your one superpower? And make damn sure that's highlighted in your resume, the LinkedIn profile, and in all of your discussions. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope that I gave you just one puff of inspiration. I hope that you recognize now that you are meant for more, that you are more than the letters by your name, the FSA and the ASA. You are more than IBNRs and CAPXs. You are more than just somebody working to the bone. One of my very favorite leaders ever was an actuary. She was an FSA. You are meant for more. And here's the good news. You just have to do a little bit of authenticity work. You just need to start to stand out. And what happens is once you start to experiment and watch how people get curious and react differently and start to listen to your updates on your actuarial model, I promise you, you'll become addicted. I don't change people, change their addiction. I want to leave you with this story. So I have an Uncle Bob. You probably all have some version of Uncle Bob, right? My Uncle Bob is a mashup of, he looks like George from Seinfeld and he acts a lot more like Kramer. He's this crazy guy, and I always say he's funny, but I have more fun watching him laugh at himself. And he tells this one story that is my favorite. And it's about the time when Matthew, my cousin, was about 3 years old, and it was his first Easter egg hunt. Now, my uncle had played football, and our whole family are big into sports. And he has this 3-year-old, his oldest, his son. He realized, he said, it was my time. It was finally my time, my big coaching moment. And he calls it his proudest coaching moment. And they get to the library, this old historic library, and the eggs are everywhere, and the kids are excited, and they have their bags, and just see sea of eggs. And Uncle Bob leans down to Matthew and he says, see that line of Easter eggs over there? And Matthew's like, yeah. He said, now, son, you see that tree? It's way off in the distance. Yeah. Okay. When they say go, I want you to run. And I don't want you to stop until you get to that tree. So sure enough, 3, 2, 1, go. Now, can you imagine what happens, right? All the kids start taking off, running, running, running. And as soon as that line of eggs started, what happens? All of them. Except for Matthew. Matthew just ran, listened to his father, and he ran till he got to that very tree. And then he got there, and he scooped up so many eggs, they couldn't even fit them on his back. And as my uncle said, he was his proudest coaching moment. That's what I want for you. I want you to stop running on that treadmill or running for those Easter eggs and just dropping and not thinking about what little changes do you need to do to have greater success. I want you to run for that tree. I want you to do things your own way. I want you to be authentic. Thank you. Oh, Joe, I can't hear you, but you're not muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right. So thank you so much, Erin. I know this was, very useful, a bit different from what we typically have in some of our sessions, but we've got a couple of minutes left. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. You can utilize that raise hand functionality that I mentioned earlier, but we got a couple of minutes before we make some closing remarks.
I'd love to hear from you. So what you got? Throw it at me.
So we've got someone that reacted, and so it looks like Pavel has a question. Pavel, feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, good morning. I actually did not have a question. I just clicked the clap button because I really enjoyed the presentation. But now that I think about it, something does pop into my mind. Oftentimes we feel confined within the boundaries of, quote, corporate culture. And it almost seems as if it's a big risk to take to kind of be your authentic self. What advice would you give to somebody who doesn't really want to make waves, but also doesn't want to kind of compromise authenticity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to be clear, like when I started to have this recognition and this sort of surge and turned up the dial on my authenticity as my secret weapon, my boss at the time was the toughest, most non-authentic person I had as a leader in my entire career. And so it did feel a little bit weird, but what I want to impress upon you is a couple of things, because it's a great question. First of all, at the end of the day, companies simply want results. And those leaders, of course, in the companies want results. And despite what you think, they actually don't care how you get there. So while I was working for this really tough, fairly non-authentic leader, there were, a few moments that might have been awkward. But as soon as, for example, I got that contract negotiation, which was a massive win, guess how much less she really cared, right? So as they start to see results. So one is, remember that people are doing what they're doing because they feel like that's the playbook that gets the results. And once you can, the other key point is, like, that's why I always say experiment. This isn't about walking into work, quote unquote, tomorrow and being a totally different human being. There are really tiny little small experiments. And that's what I talk about in my book is, everything I talk about, these are not monumental changes. These are like fire starters. And they might sound silly, but I have coached enough people in the last few years that I can tell you that it works. So combining, like, just taking little experiments, watching whether it's small successes, like somebody listened to your actuarial report out that never does, or to bigger things like people joined your team that never would have, like all of a sudden. I can tell you, the actuarial leaders out there, you start acting authentic, all the best actuarial talent is coming your way, right? And if you get the best actuarial talent coming your way, guess what's going to happen? You're going to do really great. So it's about little experiments. It's about remembering that it's about results. And it's about inspiring people all around you, including those at all levels as well. Thank you for your question.
Yes, thanks, Pavel. Sorry to put you on the spot too. Any other questions?
Joe, I'll jump in with one.
Sure.
And this is maybe for the more junior folks on the line like myself who are earlier on in our careers. You talked a lot about authenticity from a leadership perspective, but do you view it as a two-way street? As more junior folks are interacting with senior leaders and looking to build those relationships, so how can we use authenticity to further our goals there?
It's a great question, Rob. It's funny. I am very purposeful in trying to stay away from the authentic leadership word. And you see, it's not necessarily in this title, because I think the power that I had first was me as a person, not just as a leader. So how did I get noticed? How did I get promoted? How did I get tapped for the big projects? So I actually believe that the power first comes with who you are as an individual in the workplace. The next level is actually as a leader and being able to have people come join your team, right? And being a beacon for them. But I think for the younger people, also for this generation, especially this generation that I think was already trending towards this. And now we have the pandemic, which I think we all can agree has really been kind of a tailwind for authenticity, right? Like we've got, leaders with kids running through. I can't believe my daughter hasn't been in yet, right? Like you've got people just, it's such a shit show that you're like, in order to survive, like you're just going to see who I am. So I think there's no better time. I think your generation is the most powerful one. And again, I want to emphasize that I've even talked, I talked a couple months ago to an old boss of mine, a different old boss. It was a senior VP at Aetna, quite frankly. And he talked about how he really is using more and more of this concept of authenticity and who he is. And I worked for him. So that inspiration really can come from all directions. So it's not about just the leaders starting this. It really can be a bottom-up strategy. Thank you, Rob.
Erin, I've got a question for if there's any folks that are on the line that might be skeptical about what you've been saying here. Is there a line, and how do you find that line between being authentic and being unprofessional?
Yeah, so really good question. So first of all, I didn't say this, but authenticity does not equal transparency. I want to be really clear. There's a lot of, times people sort of, I've had this question many, many times, like, did you run a risk of telling your team too much? I'm like, authenticity doesn't mean like showing up at the town hall and being like, okay, last night I was up, all night worried about our systems falling apart. And then my husband and I got in a fight, right? Authenticity it's about exposing who you are when people least expect it, but it doesn't mean transparency at all. I think the key is, it also goes back to the principle of adapt. And adapt doesn't mean it's a dial. So if I'm in this presentation versus I'm being interviewed for a board position, I read the room all the time. I don't change who I am, but I change the dial, right? Because for one conversation, unexpected might be a pretty low bar, right? A talk where we're talking about authenticity, even if it's a group of actuaries, I think the bar is a little higher. It should be, right? So I think people have always asked me, like, did you have any pitfalls? Was there a time where like it backfired on you? And I haven't been able to come up with one. And again, I think it's because, I think of it in a much more nuanced way than simply be yourself or be transparent. Hope that helps.
Thank you. So we maybe have time for one more question. Is there any more questions out there? All right, sounds like that's a no. So with that, we can go ahead and close the session. Erin, anything else from you before I sort of go over a couple more housekeeping items?
Be authentic, be kind. Be there to be kind. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much, Erin. All right, just a couple of things before we wrap up for the day. So we are back here tomorrow, same time, same place, for another session. Tomorrow's session is a life and investments focused session revolving around the impact of the low rate environment that we're all currently experiencing. One other item is for the ACHS members that are on the line. You may have seen an email come through yesterday afternoon about an informal virtual networking event that we have going on this coming Monday. We will simply be joining Zoom for folks that will be watching the Monday night football game between the Patriots and the Jets. If you happen to be watching the game and you want to watch it with some fellow actuaries as well, just feel free to jump on that Zoom call to watch it with a couple of other folks. If you didn't get that email, please feel free to reach out to me or the ACHS email, members@achinfo.com. But with that, that concludes today's session, and we hope to see everybody back here tomorrow.